Okay, this should be our final day from Matthew chapter 9. And while most would have a mentality of we've got to get through this, we've got to get through this, we've got to get through this, but how do we designate this time that we're here together? All right, this is Bible study, which means you're going to follow different trails, you're going to connect different dots. Hopefully you're going to have discussion, you're going to have questions, because that is how you go about and you're involved in a proper kind of study. If you're just going through and reading what you're looking at, but not taking the time to consider, well, who's this to, what's it about, and even certain questions that are raised inside of the verses. If you're not taking the time to then ask yourself the question, well, how is this actually answered? Then you're not really going through and taking the time of study. So I hope that you've been okay with the pace that we're going at, as we are trying to get as much application from our time together, and that ultimately is the goal of any type of study that you're doing. You're trying to find a way or find the means to which, how does this fit into my life? So we're going through this, gleaning as much as we possibly can, and even put yourself in the position of the apostles as they're walking with Christ and not knowing that they only have 3 years with him. And just put yourself there and just be thinking about what you would be thinking about. Okay, here's the Savior actually in front of me. How much would you be wanting to get? Hopefully, it'd be the mentality of all that we can. So when it comes to our times of study, that's what we want to do, and that's what we're offering. So when we're considering where we are in Matthew chapter 9, let's think about where we've been. So we don't want to forget that. Matthew chapter 9, how does the chapter start?
A boat.
Okay, all right. Got in a boat, comes back to Capernaum. When he comes back to Capernaum, what does he find? Or who meets him? All right, he's meeting in a house, and he's doing what he's been doing this entire time. He's teaching, preaching, and healing, and the paralytic man comes. So there's your first instance of where he's showing himself at labor, showing himself at work, teaching and healing. He heals the man, but does he just heal the man? All right. What does he do first? Or what does he pronounce first? All right, your sins are forgiven. Here's the confirmation of it. Get up and walk. That made the scribes very angry as that was being done, because they were saying he blasphemeth because only God can do that. That's exactly right. So what have you just proven to yourself? You hard-hearted scribes. You've just proven to yourself, answered your own question, that he is the Son of God, that he is in fact deity. Leaves the paralytic man, and who does he come into contact with next? All right, he comes into contact with Matthew. Yeah. Jesus is a busy guy. So we're trying to trace back who all have we met up to this point. He's met a lot of people. Now we come to Matthew, the author of the gospel account that we're reading at this time as we're studying it. He's a tax collector, he's despised, and he's hated. But yet Jesus calls him to be one that's going to follow him, not only to follow him, but to take his message out. And we made a great bit of emphasis on the fact that who it is that Jesus is choosing to be his messengers, to be his vessels, to be his ambassadors, fishermen, tax collector. In our sermon, we made connection to the fact that he's also teaming up with somebody who would be politically his opposition, and that was who? No. It was in our sermon. It wasn't in the class. Simon. And who is Simon? All right, he's a zealot. That is a political group inside of Judaism that despises the Roman government. So here's somebody, Matthew, taking money for the government, and here's somebody that hates the government, and yet they're coming together, and they're actually going to work together. How is that? As we said in our sermon, in coming to Christ, it's very likely you're going to have to lay something down. Now, even with what Simon's viewpoint was, okay, we need to get rid of Rome. Well, instead of trying to get rid of Rome, why not try to reform Rome? And that's ultimately what Jesus was trying to do. Change their practices, change their mentality. And if you change their mentality and how they govern, then there's no need for any type of rebellion or anything like that. In the midst of that, the Pharisees come and they raise the question, not to Jesus, but to the disciples, and asking him, why does he eat with publicans and sinners? Okay, that was the other point. Matthew brings more people that are like him into the mix and that are ready to hear what Jesus has to say when they would have been cast to the side by the Pharisees. Pharisees come in, they raise the question, why is your master doing this? Jesus takes them to an Old Testament passage, tells them to go back and study and learn what it means. That was a quotation from Hosea chapter 6. We looked at chapter 5 and how that Jesus says, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. All right, so we're learning right there how to properly interpret and how to study the Bible. With Jesus saying that, does he mean, okay, you can just stop doing sacrifices? No. That in fact, if you're going to sacrifice properly, you're needing to have this attitude of mercy involved. You cannot forget what the sacrifice is designed to do. That's God's mercy towards you. Thus, you're supposed to have mercy towards others. So you have ritual, you have ceremony, you have religion, if you will, without what's behind it. And we made points of emphasis about the fact of the need for mercy, how that attitude must follow with Christ, because, well, we'll save that point because we're going to touch it again in just a little bit. But we closed last time with Psalm 147, verse 3. He healeth the broken in heart and bindeth up their wounds, the very thing that Jesus is come to do. And even in Luke's account, Luke chapter 4, verse 17, Jesus comes into the synagogue. They're reading from the book of Isaiah. They give it to him to read, and he reads from the scripture that says that very same thing, that he was come and he was anointed so as to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. And that's a quotation from Isaiah 61 and verse 1, which brings us to where we are now. Verse 14, Matthew 9. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, so we're at Matthew's house still. The Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, they come and they're raising questions as to why Jesus is doing certain things. Now we have the disciples of John coming on the scene, saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not? Jesus said unto them, can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. No man putteth a piece of new cloth unto an old garment, for that which is put in to fill it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved. Now, when the question is raised as to why they, the disciples of John, the Pharisees fast oft, but then they ask Jesus, why are your disciples not fasting? It's a pretty obvious answer as to why that would be the case. Because what emotion or what type of situation is fasting often connected with? All right, somberness, grief, mourning, trial, turmoil. So what about Jesus and his disciples? They're not mourning. They're not in turmoil. This is a happy time. And thus that's what Jesus is emphasizing. Jesus has come so as to bring joy and to bring happiness and to bring peace. And if that's what you have, why fast? Now, of course, with the Pharisees, we know why they're doing it. Matthew chapter 6, they're doing it to be seen of men. But with John and his disciples, why do you think they would be in a position where they would be fasting? Okay, John is facing persecution. And thus they have a reason to be in a time of extensive prayer and turmoil and grief and mourning and sorrow over the one that has brought them the gospel first and who they have been following after, ministering to, and helping him in his work. But yet when it comes to Jesus and his disciples, that's not the case. That's not what we have happening here, but yet Jesus does say, but the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast. So even with this discussion, we have further connection to the fact of why fasting is taking place. Sorrow. The master, the teacher, the bridegroom is going to be taken away. Okay, that's a sad thing. That's a dark time. Then they're going to fast. But while Jesus is here, this is not the time to fast. This is the time to work. So in fact, we have here in Matthew chapter 9, what is Jesus already preparing the people for? His death, his crucifixion. And so for any, it's amazing to me how we have within the religious world, and they want to act like, they want to emphasize the death, burial, and resurrection so much, but yet they would then turn around and say, but that really wasn't part of the plan. That he's supposed to come the first time, establish his covenant, establish a kingdom, and that's supposed to make everything better. But yet Jesus himself recognizes he must die so that he can set man free from sin. So to focus on the physical and not what's actually happening here, everybody's all mixed up on where the aim and where the goal actually is. Now, verse 16 and 17 coming into play as to what the mission of Christ is and what he's actually doing now, and contrasting to what many people would be considering what he actually is up to. No man putteth a piece of new cloth unto an old garment, for that which is put into fill it up, taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. So for this time frame, this is just a common sense thing. And for anybody that's done any sewing or has done seam work or worked on hymns or anything like that, hymns like the bottom of your pants, not the songs, you're going to recognize that an old garment that's just fading away is not going to hold strong to a new piece of material. That's just going to continue to rip, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And that is what Jesus is presenting to them as what's actually happening to this old system. The old system is fading away. So what do you do with that? If it's fading away and it's just tearing and ripping, you get rid of it. And so it's the same illustration with the wine or the grape juice that's being put into bottles. This grape juice that is expanding inside of these bottles and stretching the old bottles, well, guess what? You can't repeatedly go through that process. Otherwise, this is what's going to happen. Bottles are going to break, and then you've lost your grape juice, you've lost your wine. Nothing is preserved. Both are lost. And thus he's emphasizing in his presentation the transition that's already beginning to take place. We are already starting to move into these elements to where we're not doing what John is doing, and even then, or what John's disciples are doing, we're not doing what the Pharisees are doing when it comes to their fasting. We are moving into this new area where the fast is going to change. To where it's no longer going to be a commanded thing like they had under their system, but it is going to be a recommended practice and a good practice that's going to be followed through. So he did not come into the world so as to do patchwork. He came so as to present a new garment, which plays very well into our discussion that we've been having on the broadcast about the new covenant. Here, Jesus is mentioning the very fact of coming so as to establish something new. And not in the future, new in the present, while he's here. And especially as he's going to be put on the cross so as to die and sacrifice himself for the sins of the world. So we have the New Testament today, which in fact makes all of us new creatures as being Christians and followers of Christ. And thus, that's what's being emphasized here. We're not trying to take this and place it back here. We're taking that which is new and we're putting it into something that's new. So he's preparing everybody that's listening to this. Well, here's the reason why they don't fast, because this is the situation. There is going to be a time where they will fast, but even then, in the fasting that they're doing and the system and what's happening and what's taking place, it's not going to be as it was. That all of this is moving towards and transitioning towards something that's new. So, notice verse 18. Menopausing, having the discussion about whether it's easier to remove sin or to tell the man to rise up and to walk. The calling of Matthew, dealing with the other publicans and sinners that are there, taking the questions of the scribes, taking the questions of John's disciples. And while he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead. But come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. And behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, If I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith had made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. Again, just notice how busy Jesus is. He's in Matthew's house, dealing with all these people, taking all of these questions and answering all of these questions and having all of this discussion. And while you're in the middle of that, while he spake, somebody else shows up and they've got a need. They're needing your assistance. They're needing your time. They're needing your attention. And then, not only do we have this man coming and taking Jesus, and Jesus doesn't hesitate. Jesus arose, followed him, and so did his disciples. And then take a look at what happens as he's on the way. While he's on the way, here's this woman with an issue of blood. And she says within herself, if I can just touch the garment. Now, Mark's account, Luke's account, can't remember which one, I have a feeling it's Luke's account, actually mentions in this, gives further detail, that there's a huge crowd around Jesus at this time. That it's not only his disciples that are following him, but the multitude has followed him, and they are pressing on him, so much so that when this actually happens, he turns himself around and he says, Who touched me? And the apostles raise the question, well, what do you mean, who touched you? Everybody's touching you. We're in the midst of this huge, this huge crowd, and yet while he's on his way, he stops and turns around and addresses this poor woman and says, Daughter, your faith has made you whole. It's just nonstop as Jesus is going on, moving from one thing to the next to the next. But what has Jesus going is the fact that people are wanting him. Hey, we need you. We want you here. Okay, I'm going to go where I'm needed. I'm going to go where I want it. And just as we saw in chapter 8 with the Gergesenes, what about people that don't want Jesus around?
You wish that was the same for us today?
Do I know?
Wish that was the same for us today? To preach the gospel?
Well, I would say as they begin to notice with us a difference in just how ready we are to actually stand up for what's right. And that's a lot of what's going on here with what Jesus is doing. This is justice, equality, and as we're saying, mercy. Especially when people see the merciful side of us. And they recognize, okay, these people are willing to put their money where their mouth is. And their time and their effort and their energy to look out for the little people. But so let's deal with this. Not only is he dealing with little people, but here we have a certain ruler. That's going to be like in the same position as a Nicodemus, ruler of a synagogue. I think Mark's account, we're going to look at in just a moment, Mark's account actually labels him that way. Okay. Okay. So here's a certain ruler of the synagogues, and he doesn't just come to Jesus and say, hey, I need your help. He worshiped him, which is a major step, in which I don't know that I've ever connected this. I'd have to do some more digging and find out which group he's actually with, if he's a Sadducee, Pharisee. But this ends up playing against what the Pharisees are actually going to end up saying to Nicodemus later. In John's account of the gospel, they're having a secret meeting, and Nicodemus stands up and actually defends Jesus. And what do the Pharisees try to throw in his face? They make a statement. And they question Nicodemus, are you one of his disciples? Are you following him? But then they ask something else, specifically about the Pharisees. Have we claimed him? Have we followed him or worshiped him? Now, depending on who this man is, here's a certain ruler, synagogue leader. And yeah, he worshiped Jesus.
And with all of the multitudes around that gave his.
Yeah, definitely. More than likely, he's going to lose his position because of this. John chapter 9, we know that's the case, that they're taking people out of the synagogue if they're going to confess him and follow him. So here's this man, and he's willing to lay all of that on the line. But why? Daughter's even now dead. He has a need. And a need that is far greater than any earthly possession, any earthly position that he could have. And that he's willing to come and not only make this request, but he's coming so as to worship. That's a big step, and that's a big point. And that's just further going to create more indignation from the Pharisee and Sadducee side as they continue to press on. So when we consider that aspect, yes, Jesus is with publicans and sinners. He doesn't refuse them. But also, when the higher-ups, when the rulers come, he's not going to reject them either. He's willing to go. And so as we have been presented here with this woman who had the issue of blood, what's her position inside of Israel? She would actually find herself in a category with somebody that we've already studied. No. Outcast, unclean. So, who would she be like? Like a leper. All right. Leviticus chapter 15 gives us all of that detail, that this is viewed as an uncleanliness, just like with the leper, to where she would have to be separated and kept away from the rest of society. But yet, here she is in the midst of the multitude, in the midst of the crowd, and she says to herself, just chance, going into the crowd and saying, if I not touch him, if I can just touch his garment, then I can be made whole. Once again, what we have being presented to us is not only Jesus practicing what he's preaching. Okay, it's not just the situation of this man comes, Jesus goes because he's obligated. That's not what's motivating Jesus. What is motivating Jesus to go is the application and the practice of mercy. That attitude. If you don't have that attitude, then what about when somebody comes to you asking for help? It's just like what James says. You're going to shut up your bowels of compassion. You're going to say to them, well, that's tough. Be warm and be filled. The action with the attitude. And if you don't have the attitude, you're not going to have the action either. So we're further seeing how all of these are wrapped in together, that you must have both. And here's Jesus dealing with those that others would want to leave behind. So here's what the woman said. She said, let me touch his garment. Now, just for sake of discussion and going through and building argumentation that can help us in discussing these points with those that are out in the religious world and that have a misconception, misunderstanding, have been misled of what Jesus, his apostles, the scriptures are actually teaching. So when it comes to the woman saying to herself, if I can touch his garment, what made the clothes of Jesus different from everyone else's clothes in the crowd? Nothing. I'm sure there's somebody else in that crowd that were wearing the same type of thing that Jesus was wearing. Same material. And since we're under the Old Testament system, they're not going to be mixing their materials. So more than likely it's just going to be cotton or something like that that's being put on. And that's what everybody's wearing. And yet, she could touch all of those garments and touch those garments all day long. Nothing would happen. Okay? Huh? It was her belief. But not only was it her belief, but what else? What's the lesson? What's the point? All right, she had to touch. She had to do. She had to put forth the effort, going through the crowd, all that kind of stuff.
Well, she,
Okay?
Jesus.
All right. And that's all right. Let's go back to what she said. Let me touch his garment. So let's think about the garment. What you're saying is right about the woman. She has all the elements that are needed. She has a need. She recognizes that need and realizes where she needs to go. But for her to say, if I could touch the garment, I could be cleansed, and she touches the garment, and she's okay. So, there's nothing special about the garment. It's not a holy garment. It's not a holy robe that Jesus is wearing. But it was the garment's connection to Christ that made it what it was. To where she recognizes, okay, I'm not trying to touch the garment. It's just the fact that the garment is even on the body of Christ. And her recognizing, I mean, what is it that so many people have already said? What did the centurion say to Jesus about coming and healing the servant? All right, authority. Okay, all right. So we already have it being established that people are recognizing, Jesus, you don't even have to come and put your hands on anybody. You can just say it, and it'll happen. Because the power is with Christ. And thus is the same illustration right here. Well, he has so much power and so much authority, I don't even have to get so close as to touch him. I believe so much in the power that he has, if I can just touch his garment, I'll be taken care of. All right? Now, why is that important? How can we use that?
She has, not going to be answering your question, but she has little faith because she could have touched the dirt that he just walked on, steps back, and said, if I could just touch 10 steps back, then arrow. Peter or Paul shadow?
Yeah, it's going to be Peter and the other apostles that, yeah, just the shadow passing by. Yeah. But even there, it's just, it's the power of God. So how can we, what element, what situation do we have that finds itself in the same category? This plays into baptism. The reason baptism brings remission of sins is because of its connection to Christ. Not because of the water. There's nothing special about the water. It's not holy. There's nothing mystical. There's nothing spiritual. That's inside of the water itself. It's just like the woman that says, if I can touch his garment. Well, what's special about the garment? Nothing. You take that garment away from Christ and put it on anybody else, and she goes up and touches it, what's going to happen? Nothing. You take baptism away from its connection to Christ. What good is it? Nothing.
Getting wet.
You're just taking a bath. You're going swimming. You take baptism away from the death, burial, resurrection of Christ, which is what most of the religious world does. Has no connection to anything, has no significance, has no importance. So why are we doing it? Well, it's in the Bible, so therefore we have to do it, but it's got to have a reason. God does not just simply give us things for the sake of giving us things. Like, here, do this. Well, what's the point? I don't know. Everything God does has a point. And just like with the woman saying, if I can touch the garment, because it's connected to Christ. God says, you get in the water because the water is connected to Christ. Know ye not that so many of us, as we're baptized into Jesus Christ, faith doesn't put you into Christ. Faith alone, I should say. Faith alone does not put a person into Christ. Repentance alone does not put a person into Christ. Confession alone does not put a person into Christ. This is the element that connects one with Christ. And thus the reason why it has its significance. But it doesn't just simply apply to just to the practice of baptism. It applies to everything that we're doing. The Lord's Supper. Why is that significant? Why is that important? Why does that have any relevance? It's connected to the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. What significance would the church even have if you removed it from Christ? That's the denominational world. They're not connected to Christ. Thus, there's no power there. There's no redemption there. There's no safety. There's nothing which is being promised. And that's what everybody is actually in the practice of doing. They are taking all of these elements and they are removing them from Christ himself. Even the things that Jesus says you're supposed to do, prayer, you're supposed to do that. But you ask a denominational person, well, do I need to pray? Well, it's a good thing for you to pray, but no, you don't need to. Okay, you're removing it from its power source. So what good is it? There's no relevance to it. Even when it comes to the Bible that we're reading. If Jesus had not died, been buried, and resurrected, shedding his blood so as to bring in the New Testament, if the New Testament, if the words on those pages are not connected to this, we might as well just be reading the newspaper. What made the garment significant is that it's connected to the body. It's connected to Christ. Faith, repentance, confession, baptism in water for the remission of sins, being added to his body, the church, the doctrine that we have. All of it has its significance because it's connected to Christ. But you take it away from that, there's nothing. You have a thought?
No. I don't want to mention any names just in case somebody's listening in, but this is kind of the exact thing that we're talking about.
Right.
When I'm talking to this person, they're saying that, yeah, we should, but we don't have to. That's kind of where we're at now. It's hardening things, but I'm still working.
And for a person to say that they have all of this appreciation for the blood of Christ, and they want to have recognition for the blood of Christ, well, then you have to recognize everything that the blood of Christ is touching. The blood of Christ not only touches us for the cleansing of sin, but you read the Hebrew letter, and it was not without the touching of blood that you could have a New Testament or a new covenant. So the blood of Christ not only touches us, but it's touched the church, thus giving it authority, recognizing its power. It's touched the New Testament, the doctrine that we have, is because he shed his blood for it. So to look at all these things and say, well, they're not important, you're looking at the blood of Christ and saying that it's not important because the blood of Christ touches all of that. And thus the emphasis that's being placed here. If you are wanting to be found inside of Christ and to come to Christ, then you've got to come. Just as everybody was mentioning with the lady's faith, look at all the effort that she's putting in. And, I mean, if you really want to get down to it, when it comes to the Old Testament system, she was technically doing something she was not supposed to be doing. Here's this huge crowd. She's not even supposed to be there. Exactly. And if she is there, just like with the leper, what are they supposed to do if they come around people? Unclean, unclean. And everybody scatters. But yet here she is in the midst. And she has the faith that says, if I can just get close enough to touch the garment, then this can happen. All right? So then what about this? Yeah, exactly. Right. She shouldn't even have to go into the city, go into the crowd, nothing. Just, Jesus should have just sensed it and said, okay. But it's the fact that you've got to do. Just like with this man wanting his daughter healed. Okay, you've got to come get me. You got to come find me. Seek, and you'll find. Ask, and it'll be given. Knock, and it'll be open. You've got to come and make the effort. And when you do that, Jesus will respond. God himself will, in fact, respond. So going back to the leader here. Mark 5:22 says, behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue. Oh, I forgot, it actually gave us his name. Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. So here's this ruler of the synagogue. And he comes with the recognition, I'm worshiping you, I have a need. But not only that, so we've already kind of touched on this, but we'll go a little bit deeper with it. As we said with the discussion of, with John's disciples about fasting. And we were making the point of Jesus is already making mention of the fact he's going to be taken away, which means he's going to die. Right? Okay. Now, here comes this ruler of the synagogue. And he comes asking Jesus to do what again? All right. Has Jesus done that yet? No, I'm not saying him personally. I'm saying, has he done that for anybody else yet? No. So far, we've been dealing with people that are sick unto death. The centurion servant, he wasn't dead yet. Almost dead. But he was on his way. But yet here comes this ruler of the synagogue, a Jewish elite, and he comes with the recognition, Jesus, you can raise my daughter from the dead. Where'd he get that? Okay. We're seeing the power that Jesus has being multiplied and growing to the point people are already recognizing, well, if you can do this, why can't you do this? Why can't you raise somebody from the dead? Now, that's a pretty big point considering that this ruler of the synagogue comes with this understanding, okay, you can raise my daughter from the dead, but yet who struggles with that thought process all through Jesus' work? His disciples, his apostles, yes.
That would
Not specifically. Because if my brain is working properly, the word resurrection does not appear in the Old Testament. But they had an understanding of it, some sort of understanding of it. Because you read Hebrews chapter 11, and you read about Abraham offering Isaac his son. Now, we don't get this from the Old Testament, but we get it from the New Testament explaining. Why was Abraham ready to offer up his son Isaac? Uh-huh. Okay. So Abraham was able to reason together, and Hebrews 11 says it specifically that God could raise him from the dead. So they already had this idea and this principle, and which you had raising of dead people in the Old Testament as well. It's either Elijah or Elisha. I think it's Elisha. Raised a woman's child that died. He got hit in the head. He fell, or he either fell and hit his head, or an animal kicked him and gave him an injury to his head. And by the time the prophet got there, he'd already died. And the prophet stretched himself out over the child's body and brought the child back to life. So they already had some experiences with raising from the dead. Okay, and Saul with the witch, which she didn't do it, but God brought forth Samuel's spirit from the other side to confront Saul. So yeah, they have their situations and their events where they recognize there is something on the other side. But as far as the idea of somebody actually being brought back in that way, and so even from that standpoint, just the fact of a prophet doing that, okay, a prophet doing that is one thing. That he's imploring and that he's begging on the part of God for God to do this very thing. But then Jesus comes on the scene, and it's just him. He is doing this by the power that he has as being deity. That separates him from the others. And so like we said in our previous class, that's what the Pharisees, Sadducees have an issue with. Okay, you want to call yourself a prophet, that's fine. We've had prophets that have done this kind of stuff. But then you move yourself into the area of God and taking away sin, that's something different. That's a new problem. That's a new category. So yes, so while the word resurrection does not appear in the Old Testament, they did have their brief experiences with it and recognizing that it was in fact something that was possible, and that they even had it in their understanding that God very well could do this very thing. But as far as Jesus and his earthly ministry, this is the first mention of it, though so even in this situation, he's not raising from the dead, because he gets there and he says, well, she's not dead, she's asleep, so on and so forth. But just the fact of, so like we're saying, the build up to what is coming and to what people are already recognizing. And here's a ruler of the synagogue, and he recognizes, okay, you can raise from the dead, and yet his apostles are going to follow him for 3 years, and they're constantly going to be bickering and arguing. And Peter even rebukes him to the face and says, be it not so, Lord, Matthew 16, that he would die in Jerusalem. Yeah, so it's a crazy thing that you have those, and it oftentimes goes this way. You have those that are closest to the situation, and yet they're the ones that see the least. Kind of like missing the forest because of the trees type deal. You're so close to this that you don't want to see, and then here's somebody who's kind of on the fringe and on the outskirts because of his position, and he sees more than as close as ones could. So we don't need to get ourselves in a position of, oh, well, I'm in the church, I'm a Christian, and therefore that just qualifies me to see everything. Not if you're not putting in the effort. Not if you're actually putting in the time and being willing to recognize what it is these people are willing to recognize. So, Jesus is already laying the foundation. He's going to die. He's going to be taken away, but that he's going to rise again. And as we said, here we are early in Jesus' work, and this ruler of the Jews comes in full assurance that Jesus can do this. You can raise my daughter from the dead, even though he's not done that yet. And it's based upon what he's already done. And as he's on his way to do this, runs into the woman with the issue of blood. And so as we said, it's just nonstop. And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said unto them, give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. So here we have Jesus with his insight. And again, those that are close to the situation, ignoring the facts of the situation. Jesus comes in and they're making all this noise. They're going through the funeral process. And it's just like, well, she's not even dead yet. Well, we think she's dead. We may feel like she's dead. Our emotions are telling us that she's dead. But what's the truth of the matter? What's the facts of it? Jesus comes in and he says, she's not dead, she's sleeping. But because of what they thought they knew, here's the reaction. They mocked, they laughed him to scorn. And here's the Son of God, and that's what you're doing. He knows the thoughts and the intents of a man's heart. He already was able to tell what the scribes were saying within themselves, and he answered them, and you don't think that he can tell when a person's dead or not? I mean, he's the great physician. He's the best doctor there is. And what kind of doctor would he be if he couldn't even tell if a person's dead or not? And they laughed him to scorn, but he doesn't stop. But when the people were put forth, he went in, took her by the hand, and the maid arose. Whatever sickness she had was gone and was taken care of. And the fame hereof went abroad into all that land. Now, is it just the fame of him healing somebody? Well, that's what they're going, and I'm sure that's what they're announcing. But what is it that people are really paying attention? What is it they're going to recognize? All right, he's got power, but why is he doing it? To prove his word, to prove his work, and to prove his motivation behind it. Like, why take the time? You've already got a multitude of people at Matthew's house. Why would you leave them and go to this ruler's house to heal his daughter? Because you care. So it's not just a situation of he's going out and doing these things, but look who he's doing them for. He's healing the woman with the issue of blood on the way. Why would you even stop? You've got a mission, you've got an aim. And yet you stop to address this woman. Why? Because he cares. And even as we move forward and we are able to see what happens next. So he's not done with his work inside of this chapter. Verse 27, when Jesus departed thence, so he's gone from Matthew's house to the ruler's house. Now he's leaving the ruler's house, and two blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou son of David. And notice what they're saying. Have mercy on us. That's the key to all of it. Have mercy on us. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus saith unto them, Believe ye that I am able to do this? They said unto him, Yea, Lord. Then touched he their eyes, saying, According to your faith, be it unto you. And their eyes were opened. Jesus straightly charged them, saying, See that no man know it. This attitude, what they're requesting, what they're crying out for, they're not just simply crying out for healing. They are calling out for what drives the healing. They are crying out for mercy. And that really is the theme behind this entire chapter. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. He said that to the Pharisees, and now here Jesus is, and he's practicing it. He's showing it. Mercy is the motivating tool. The attitude that's followed all the way from the mountain. And here are these blind men. What does a blind man see? Physically, what do they see? Nothing. So what about everything that Jesus has done? Have they seen any of it? Witnessed any of it? They've merely just heard the report. Here's what this man has done. Here they are, having seen nothing that Jesus has done. And Jesus raises the question, Believe ye that I'm able to do this? And they said unto him, Yea, Lord. Having faith without even seeing what was done. Okay. You get to John's account, and Thomas is there. And Jesus says to Thomas, all right, you're blessed because you've seen me and believed. But then Jesus puts a greater blessing on those that will believe and not having seen, which is us today. We've not seen Jesus. We've not seen him do any of his mighty works. What do we have? We just have the report. We just have the message. We have the fame that's being spread abroad. All right? Even with what you've heard, do you believe that I'm able to do this? Yeah. Absolutely. Here they are, and they are expressing full assurance of not only the power, but his attitude to dispense with what he has. Because if you stop and you think about it, Jesus could have all the power in the world. He did have all the power in the world, still does. And he had all the power to heal. But what if he did not have this right here? Then they would not get anything. But you have God with us. And what is being expressed over and over and over again? Mercy. God has mercy. God has pity. He has compassion. And because of that, it brings these people to him. But in thinking about this miracle, from the physical aspect, let's not forget the spiritual application as well. In Acts chapter 26, verse 17, when Paul is retelling his conversion account, he makes mention of what it was that he was then being sent to do. Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee. To do what? To open their eyes. To heal their blindness. To turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. As Jesus is going through, and as Paul and others, as they're doing their work, Jesus is going through and doing these physical miracles. He's not just doing it for the sake of the physical. But as Jamie said, what he's doing physically with these miracles is to confirm what he's trying to do spiritually. Jesus is not just healing physical blindness, but spiritual blindness also. And in chapter 9, verse 13, he's already addressed their blindness. And in chapter 15, it will be stated again. They be blind leaders of the blind. And what happens when you're following the blind? You all fall in the ditch. And when we are considering this, contrasted to what Jesus has just done for these physically blind men, which is worse? Physical blindness or spiritual blindness? Physical blindness is bad. That's terrible. I would not want to lose my eyesight. But physical blindness is not nearly as terrible as spiritual blindness. With physical blindness, you may hurt yourself physically, but with spiritual blindness, you'll hurt yourself spiritually. It holds you in a position where you're just unable to see truth. See it for what it is. And there are different elements. So as we're saying, this blindness, that's just a symptom. There's something that's causing that blindness. For the Jews, for the people that Jesus is dealing with during his time frame, it's going to be prejudice. Prejudices can hold a person in blindness, where they're not able to see the truth. And as we've already discussed, self-righteousness. creates a spiritual blindness to where you're not able to see properly what's being presented. Self-satisfaction, I'm just happy where I am. I like what I've got. Not willing to lay it to the side. A lack of feeling. The wrong attitudes, the wrong characteristics. And these are beams, and it's because of these beams, as we saw in Matthew chapter 7, we read in Matthew chapter 7, what happens when you have a beam in your eye? It impairs your vision. Makes it to where you can't see straight. Matthew chapter 6, Jesus has already dealt with. If your eye be single, then you'll be able to accomplish what it is you're needing to do. But if your eye be evil, you've got some beam in it, you've got something that's impairing your vision, then what? The light's not going to be able to get through. And he raises the question as to how great is that darkness? So just as we mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, let's not forget why all of these things are happening. He's not just healing people for the sake of healing them. The miracles and the healing that he's performing is to emphasize what it was that his mission was given to him. Seek and to save the lost. Matthew chapter 1, in discussing the birth of the Savior, and Joseph is being told that he is come so as to remove sin. He's come to save his people from their sin. And that's what all of this is emphasizing. If I can take away blindness, then I can take away sin. And just as we said with all the illustrations, blindness is usually a connection to sin, unrighteousness. So in removing the physical blindness from these men, it is in fact showing even further to Israel, just like going back to the Old Testament prophets with Hosea chapter 5 and 6, he's stating to the audience, to his crowd, this is the state of the nation at this time. Just as it was in Hosea's day. You're sick. You're in need of healing. You're in need of restoring. But you're going about the wrong way. You're blind to what's going on around you. And you're needing your sight to be given back to you so as to move forward. And they have all of these things happening in front of them. They continue to refuse it. And one of these, if not all of these, are the culprit. Now, just as we said with our study, we're not pointing these things out on the Pharisees just to say, oh yeah, how bad the Pharisees are. But why are we pointing these things out about the Pharisees? Hey, come on in. Are we just looking at the Pharisees to say, oh yeah, the Pharisees, they're a bad crowd? What's the warning? Okay. We're pointing this out in the Pharisees because this can happen to us. And is there not a church that's talked to in the Revelation? And they're given this same situation? Open their eyes? Was there not a church in Revelation 3 that Jesus says, you're blind, you're sick, you're naked, and you think that you have need of nothing? So you see right there, all of this is being pointed out, not just so that we can see it in others, but so we can see it in ourselves. That we, as a congregation, we can end up just like the Pharisees. All right, verse 31. But they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame in all that country. So Jesus says, don't tell anybody. But of course, it's hard to contain something like this. Even if they didn't tell anybody, you don't think people are going to notice this? Like, hey, you were just blind yesterday. What's going on? You can't, so it's one of these situations where it's not going to be able to be kept hidden. And as they went out, behold, they brought him a dumb man possessed with the devil. And when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitude marveled, saying, notice, it was never so seen in Israel. Notice the contrast. Jesus is helping people. And they are people, and there are people that are waiting to hate on him for it. How do you think the Pharisees, scribes, Sadducees are going to deal? How they're going to take the people praising him like this? Oh man, we've never seen anything like this. It's right there in the next verse. But the Pharisees said, he casteth out devils through the prince of the devils. And they're going to try to use that same argument later on. Now here's a very important point for us to consider. Here are these people, here's this multitude, and they're all seeing the same event. Here are these two blind men, and they're healed. All of these people saw the same event, and yet they're reacting differently to the same event. Why do you think that is? Okay. There's different motivations, there's different attitudes with these people. And so we ask today, why is it that people will not see the Bible alike? Why is it I can read one passage and you can read it too, and then we end up seeing it differently? The answer is right here. Here's the reason why. You're either wanting to see the truth for what it is, or you've got some type of blindness, some improper motivation that's not allowing you to see it. You don't want to see it. And it's all because of a bad attitude. So even with this, as it's being emphasized, are we going to win everybody? No. Not even Jesus could win everybody. But whose fault is it? It's not Jesus' fault. It's not the Word's fault. It's not the truth's fault. It has to do with the mind of the person. The Pharisees were self-righteous. They had position. They had power. They had respect. And they were in charge. They were making the rules. And here comes the Savior of the world, the person that they've been reading about for thousands and thousands of years. And they rejected him. They rejected the truth. Not the truth's fault. There's nothing wrong with the Word. There's nothing wrong with the Scriptures. It has to do with them. If I have a bad attitude, then I will interpret, or I will not interpret correctly. I'll start twisting. And I'll start misusing. To where here are the Pharisees, and they're taking something good that Jesus said, and what are they doing with it? He's doing that by the power of the devils. And there are people just like this today. To where you can be going through, living your life, and doing the very things that Jesus does. You can read it right there, black and white, and some translations even in red. You can be doing the very same thing that Jesus is doing for the very same purpose. And what will people say? You're not doing the work of God, you're doing the work of the devil. Why are they seeing it differently? For the same reason the Pharisees didn't see this the same way. They didn't see it as a good thing, they saw it as a bad thing because they're selfish. So interpretation begins on the inside. Recognizing our spiritual bankruptcy, poor in spirit, Matthew 5:3. The very first one. Our need for God. and the need for things that we cannot provide for ourselves. But God has provided these things to us even though we're unworthy of them. That produces the right attitude so as to see the truth the same way. The reason why people will not see the truth the same way is because they got some type of prejudice that's in the way. They've got some type of blinder that's there. Some impure motivation that they're involved in something that's like, well, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep allowing this in my life. And in order to do that, I can't see this the same way. But yet here's this entire multitude, and they're coming to Jesus, and why? Because they see it for what it is. They see their need, they recognize what He has, and they lay everything else to the side. Now the Pharisees are following Him, but are they following Him? No. So if we're wanting people to get on the same page, to where we're able to correctly interpret, we've got to look at ourselves on the inside. Do I really want the truth? Will I buy the truth and sell it not? Will I have a love for the truth? 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Will I love truth so much that even when I find myself in contradiction to the truth, that I'll give up whatever it is that's putting me at odds? Most people won't. They're willing to sacrifice truth, turn away from truth so they can keep what they have. That's not what's being presented here. In verse 35, Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. So here we have all of this that's going on. Jesus is busy, 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 busy. And what do we still find Him doing? He's still busy. Going about all the cities and all the villages throughout Capernaum, throughout Galilee. Notice first, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. Teaching first, healing second, because this is what the people are needing. The people are needing the teaching, they're needing the preaching, they're needing the gospel. And the miracles are confirmation to what He's teaching is the truth. The criticism of the Pharisees did not stop Jesus in His work. And there were plenty of people ready to trash talk. Problems are going to arise. But those problems cannot stop us. They did not stop the Savior. They did not stop His apostles. And so they should not stop us. What about when people start criticizing us? And they already have. You got to keep going. And help them to realize you're not seeing this right. Because you have a false perception. You have a false view. That's causing you not to be able to see it the way that God would have you to see it. Teaching and preaching continues in spite of the negativity. And we will lose our way. We will lose our way very fast if we start basing our actions and what we're going to do too much on what people are saying about us. Well, Jesus, you're getting this negativity from the Pharisees and Sadducees. You need to tweak something. You need to change something. No, I'm not changing. They need to change. In fact, Jesus says in Luke's account of the gospel, woe unto you when all men speak well of you. For so did your fathers, the false prophets. You've got everybody on your side. You've got everybody praising you. They don't have anything negative to say about you. Something's off. Because if Jesus is in the world and they've got something negative to say about him, and you're coming through this squeaky clean, there's not anything wrong with Jesus. There's not anything wrong with the truth. There's something wrong with you. People had negative things to say about Christ. They'll have negative things to say about his people. Jesus is going to lay that out in chapter 10. But it's to be expected. And it's with this verse, which brought us into our sermon material, 36 through 38, even in the midst of the negativity. And he's teaching and preaching, and then he looks on the multitude, he looks on the crowd. And how does he see them? How does he look on them? With compassion. You mean even those ones that are saying these ugly things about you? Yeah. Seeing them scattered as sheep without a shepherd. They faint. They're troubled. They're in despair. And I can't remember all the other synonyms that we went through that could be translated for that phrase. And Jesus says, I'm going to send people out to help you. Even though you're kicking against it and you don't want to receive it, we're still going to send people out to get you. And that's all we're trying to do today. We are trying to go out and to help people remove whatever it is that's helping them from seeing the truth the same. And they'll kick and they'll scream. It's almost like taking children to the doctor. They'll kick and they'll scream, I don't want to go. But you need to go. Well, what he's going to do, it may hurt. Yeah, it may hurt. But sometimes you have to go through a little bit of pain so as to get better. Matthew 24, what is the Lord's house? It's the church, but that phrase, house. Therapia. It's a place of therapy. Therapy hurts. Therapy is painful. But you need it if you're going to get better. Okay. That puts us through Matthew chapter 9. So I know we covered a lot of material, and to kind of bring it to a summation and then ask any questions, comments, or thoughts is kind of difficult. But are there any other questions or extra thoughts or extra comments? All right. If not, then we will stop there and take a short little break.